Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about constitutions and the US Constitution primarily, but also looking at other constitutions over time. Because the United States has been the world's largest economy for quite some time now, and has had a lot of influence in world affairs. The US Constitution tends to be sort of the most, or the best known at least. But there, in fact, have been many constitutions in many different places, and all of them have been just a nice document, high-minded ideals that fell by the wayside almost as quickly as the document was produced. So the US Constitution was different in as much as up until quite recently it was held as being central to the whole structure of US government and government management of affairs, and indeed the whole concept of jurisprudence in the United States, the practice of law. So the US Constitution, and it's had its moments. Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, as an example, suspended habeas corpus, and that was an attack directly, I believe, on the sanctity of the Constitution and what it represented. And there have been other times in history, particularly during wartime, when either civil war or when the threat of invasion was real, that various aspects of the Constitution seem to have been set aside. We can say that's not necessarily unusual when invasion and the entire sort of nation and body politic and everything's at risk. So we can say that's well, I don't know about being forgivable, but understandable maybe is a better way of putting it. So the Constitution, though, has survived and has come back strongly, and it's those that would attack it have been in the minority. The majority have supported the Constitution and what it represents and the framework for good government that it lays out and outlines. So let's have a look at other constitutions, though. Did you know, for example, that in 1871 the German states, and there was a patchwork of states of duchies and minor aristocratic sort of areas and small kingdoms and Prussia, of course, being the largest, and they all merged to become the German nation. And there's a number of the states that didn't want to really integrate on the basis, or not integrate, but amalgamate as a state on the basis of that Prussia would have, being the most populous and largest nation with the biggest bureaucracy, would have a bigger say over it. And some of them had, for example, been more friendly with Austria than they were with Prussia. And so there'd been a lot of back and forth. Some were even quite pro-French. Nonetheless, the Germanic-speaking peoples, at least of that Northern European area, amalgamated, and they had a constitution. Now, they had a lot of, this is 1871, and they had a lot of other constitutions to refer to. Recently in 1868, there'd been quite an update of British law and a practice of law and extending the franchise, and so there's some good examples there. And again, Britain or England had been for centuries a place where the citizens of England were the freest in Europe. So it was a good, if you want to look at sort of how to run a state that has been successful and look at the laws and so on that support and underwrite that, then there was an example close by. There was the French Revolution and the Declaration of Rights of Man and the various other attendant documents and that, and not to mention the writings of everyone from Rousseau and Descartes and Hegel and the list goes on of writers and thinkers who talked about the rights of man, even going back to Dante, the rights of man and how the rights of the citizen and the individual, the obligations of citizenship, and how the state should serve the citizenry and so on. Frederick the Great in the 1750s and 60s had also been been quite active in declaring that the state had obligations to look after its citizens and so on. And then, of course, they could refer to the American Constitution, the United States Constitution, that was probably the more famous of all of them, and with some great thinkers and writers, guys like Madison and Jefferson and so on. So they had a lot of material to go over, and the Constitution they wrote in 1871 for the Federation of the German States, by all measure, was pretty good. You'd be hard pressed to pick too many holes in it. I mean, today with more than 150 years after the event, we can look at it and say, "Oh, gee, that's a bit of an ordinary idea." But at the time, for the challenges and pressures and issues they faced, it was pretty good. I think as good, if not better in some ways than the American Constitution. One of its failings was it got into too much detail rather than laying the framework for good government. It tried to get down to the level of the very Germanic, this, by the way, tried to get down to the level of detail where you don't do this, but you can't do that, but you can do that and do it this way. So that level of detail, I think, undermined the practicality of the German Constitution. But the Constitution had lasted barely 3 years at best before it was being discarded by almost everybody. And among the reasons of it was that the public service this is particularly the Prussian public service, but also the bigger German states such as Bavaria and Saxony and so on. Their public services were not on side with it. They didn't think it was gave too much power to the people. It was impractical from an administrative point of view. It was going to be a bone of contention rather than something that would smooth the way ahead. Were among the views that were seen. So they just didn't support it. And the Prussians in particular thought it just got in the way of what they wanted to do. And kind of nobody looked out for it. There was no one defending it or protecting it. There weren't necessarily people actively running around undermining it, although there was a bit of that. But they just didn't. Nobody was there to protect. There was no court, high court or Supreme Court or superior court or something like that could protect it and then tell, no, you can't do that. The Constitution says such and such. Now, if you look at also the Soviet Union, they had a constitution, and but that constitution was treated arbitrarily by those in power. If it suited them to trot out some of the Constitution's clauses, they would, and if it didn't, and mostly it didn't, then they wouldn't. And for example, it was in the Soviet Union Constitution that they had to actively support militarily, if necessary, any communist revolution anywhere in the world. That scared the crap out of the West, by the way. That particularly after World War II, there's a lot of wringing of hands and chewing of fingernails over that clause. And the Soviets trotted that constitution out all the time. It's in the constitution. We have to help people in our who are going through a communist revolution. So, but basically the constitution died with before even the ink was dry on it. It just didn't suit. It was high-minded ideals and aspirational perhaps, but it just didn't suit the hard practical reality of dictatorial power. It got in the way of that. And really, if you look at any constitution anywhere around the world, it was written with the idea, in the modern era I'm talking about here, including Eastern Europe after 1945, these constitutions have rules and regulations everyone is meant to follow and adhere to. But when you have a group that thinks they have the right, and they don't represent the people, they have the right to exercise power as and when they see fit, and to whatever extent they deem appropriate, and this is obviously the arbitrary exercise of power, then constitutions, they just get in the way. It's like laws, they just get in the way. Laws and constitutions are there to keep you under control, but they're not supposed to apply to people or the government with power, or particularly the autocratic aspect of power. And this is where constitutions have tended to work passably well in democratically run nations where the government's job is to represent the people. They are the people's representatives in Parliament to make decisions on behalf of the people. So the government isn't the power, they're the servants of the people. Once voted in and they've got their policies that they've been voted in, sure, they have the power to exercise and see those policies through. But so constitutions have only worked fairly narrowly in situations where, as I say, the politicians are elected to represent the people, and the franchise needs to be in England, even where the voter base or the electorate was, say, 25% of adult males. There was still, not that there wasn't arbitrary power, it didn't all work perfectly, but there was still this view that the government was obligated to look after the people and to represent them. Again, not perfectly, but there was that sense of obligation, or in the French, noblesse oblige. And this meant that a constitution or a set of laws, in the case of Britain, they didn't necessarily have a constitution, but rather laws, then these can work. So clearly codified laws that everyone everyone has to comply with, and everyone is treated equally in a court. And so there are various subsets to constitutions. Independent courts, for example, elected representatives, an impartial, independent public service, supreme courts or superior courts to hear matters that may have reference to or affect the interpretation of the Constitution. So there's a number of factors and subsets that come together to make a constitution work. So now coming to the US Constitution, it's under direct assault. Let's not mince words here. It's under direct assault. The globalists want to fuck the Constitution and get rid of it. It gets in their way. It hinders their objectives. They have to sort of deal with it, interface with it to get a lot of things done that they want to get done. That they want the Constitution gone or put into irrelevance. Now, the Prussian or the German Constitution existed for 40 odd years before it was a new constitution that was written. But again, it died almost immediately from the time it was written. And disappeared into irrelevance. Hardly anybody mentioned it after a year or two following its writing. So, and this happens too all around the world, where there's South America, there are constitutions written. But those dictatorial banana republics don't give a shit about the Constitution. So the Constitution of the United States today, though, gets in the way of autocratic power. And let's call the globalist sort of move what it is. It's autocratic, but they are not getting the will of the people. They are governing and forcing this mass migration and a whole range of things without the consent of the people. The public services have been infiltrated and turned into autocratic attempts to further undermine the Constitution and rule of law and due legal process. Look at the FBI in the United States and the Department of Justice, fucking Merrick Garland, for goodness sakes. They might as well just go out and take the Constitution out the back and set fire to it for the things they're doing. And there's nothing really stopping them. There are limits to what they can get away with on any given day, but wow, are they pushing those limits? What are going after parents who are complaining about critical race theory? I mean, for goodness sakes, the Department of Justice and FBI isn't there for that. That's not their job. And under the Constitution, it was never conceived as their job. But they're doing these sort of things. So they want to get rid of the Constitution or turn it into, an irrelevant, something that's in a museum that school kids may go, oh, that was interesting. Well, when did that happen? Who was that fucker, George Washington? That sort of thing. That's what they want to turn it into. And then once they've actually got rid of the Constitution, all it represents, which is the framework of good governance, then they can do whatever it is the fuck they want to do, and that's where they're going with this, which is why the Constitution is under so much assault. Now, we just need to consider this for a minute. Everyone from the president to the members of Congress to the judges of the Supreme Court, and indeed all of the courts, and the senior public servants in places like the FBI and the Department of Justice and so on. They've all sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. Now, how, just consider this for a minute. They've actually sat there, hand on the Bible or whatever it is, saying, I'll defend and uphold the Constitution. I'll adhere to the Constitution. And the first thing they do when they take their hand off the Bible or have sworn that oath of allegiance to the Constitution, first thing they do is busily go about trying to fuck it. And so no one who is tasked with and has taken an oath to defend the Constitution is actually defending it. They're either sitting back and letting it be trampled on and pissed on and so on, or they're actively participating in the destruction of the Constitution. And this is now the time for people to stand up and say, no, this Constitution is important. It is one of the best frameworks in written existence for understanding and implementing good governance and good government for the people. It starts off with the people. So this is something that people should be standing up vigorously to defend. And if someone like Merrick Garland or the goons at the FBI or the CIA or wherever, it doesn't matter, wherever, want to make that assault and undermine and eradicate or dilute the Constitution, then they can find themselves in court justifying what they've done, and some of them, I believe, should be dragged into court, and if found guilty, should do time in prison. You've been with Tasteless today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.